Still really high.
Okay, we'll bring the Tuesday, May 28th Board of Adjustments meeting to order. Can I get a approval of the minutes from our April 23rd, 2019 meeting?
I make a motion to approve the agenda. Oh, the meeting minutes.
Minutes.
The minutes.
I'll second.
All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Bring this to new business. We have a variance request for 610 18th Avenue South. And we'll get a presentation from our new planning person.
Hi, okay, so, the variance application is for 1610 18th Avenue South. The applicant's name is Joseph Dawson, and what they're looking for is a requested variance of the interior side setback to allow an addition to an existing attached garage to encroach 1 foot into the required setback. So the property is in the SR2 zoning district, which means the required minimum setback is 5 feet, but the variance is for a 4-foot setback, so a 1-foot variance. This is the subject property. So currently, the applicant has an existing 11-foot wide single-stall garage, and they want to add an addition that would make it a 20-foot wide double-stall garage. Again, the primary structure is in the SR2, and the addition would be placing the structure 1 foot into the required 5-foot interior side setback. So based on evaluating these, the 5 criteria required for a variance, staff found that for the first requirement, the subject property is actually 2,487 square feet larger than the minimum lot size required in the SR2 zoning district. And the subject property also has a lot width that is 17 feet wider than the minimum width required in the SR2. So the desire to construct a 2-stall garage is not unique to the subject property or to a single dwelling district in general. So for the first requirement, the criteria is not satisfied. The second requirement is that the proposed project will not adversely affect the rights of adjacent property owners or residents. Staff agrees that we have found no data that would identify an adverse impact to adjacent neighbors, and we've not received any comments on this application. We also believe it's worth noting that there have been several variances granted in this area already. So for the second requirement, the criteria is satisfied. For the third requirement, the applicable standards will constitute an unnecessary physical hardship because the property cannot be used for an otherwise allowed use. So vehicle storage is an accessory use to the residential use of the property, and it's not required for the use and enjoyment of the property for residential household living. So staff finds that a strict application of the applicable standard will not constitute an unnecessary physical hardship because the property can be used for an otherwise allowed use without coming into conflict with applicable site development standards. So criteria 3 is not satisfied. The proposed project will not adversely affect the public health, safety, or general welfare. Staff agrees that there's no data that identifies an adverse effect on public health, safety, or welfare, so this criteria is satisfied. Then finally, the variance is the minimum variance to overcome the hardship, and having a 1-foot variance would be the minimum needed to allow the structure to fit. So that criteria is satisfied. So based on those 5 criteria, staff would recommend that to accept the finding of the staff and deny the requested variance to allow an addition to an existing attached garage to encroach 1 foot into the required interior side setback on the basis that the review criteria of this section have not been met. And I'd be happy to answer any questions, and the applicant, Joey Dawson, is also here for any questions as well.
Thank you. Any questions for staff?
Do you know what the distance to the adjacent property would be with this proposed addition?
I don't know what the distance to the existing, you mean like 606?
Correct.
No, I don't know off the top of my head what the distance to their home is or how close they are from their setback.
Because the reason I asked, within a certain distance, it would require a firewall separation between, with the addition wall.
Any other questions for staff? Would the applicant like to address the board? Can come up to the podium over there if you wish.
This one on? Okay. Yeah, I guess I don't have any additional information, anything else that was, or anything to add that wasn't already included in the packet, but if you guys have any questions for me.
Questions? Any questions for the applicant? Is there a motion?
I make a motion to accept the variance request to allow the proposed addition to encroach into the required interior side setback area in the SR2 zoning district on the basis that the review, well, just in the SR2 zoning district, period.
Is there a second?
Second?
Any discussion?
I know in the past, we've wanted to encourage improvement to the lots in the residential districts, the SR2 zoning districts that are fairly close to downtown and to maintain some of those neighborhoods. And it's common now to have 2 vehicles per household. And so that's why I created the motion that I did.
Any
So I
other-
would just, I'm sure the inspector, residential inspector 2 will have oversight on this, but just make sure that there is, if there is a distance requirement for your adjacent property, that you maintain the proper code requirements for that.
Okay, as far as the firewall, you're saying? If
And again,
one- if one's
that is
required.
if it is within that distance, so.
Okay, we'll look into that.
Okay, please call the roll.
Wendell Dobb,
Yes.
Barine,
Yes.
Lundberg,
Yes.
Ford Dunker,
Yes.
Love.
No. That's 4 yeses, your variance is approved. Moving on to other business. Looks like Aaron has a update for us on the Land Development Code Diagnostic Study and Core Neighborhood Plan.
Yes, thank you. So we wanted to throw these kind of 2 studies on the agenda here just to provide you all with an update on some of the things that I think you've probably heard referenced in previous meetings, and just to give you a sense of some of the things that we're working on here in 2019 into 2020. So I'll give you just a quick overview of 2 projects that we're currently kind of getting off the ground, and then if there's any questions, feel free to ask. The first one is the Land Development Code Diagnostic. I've got a couple of slides on each of these, but essentially the purpose of this study, it's, you might recall that I think 2-3 years ago, probably by now, we had the residential LDC task force that was put together. 2 members from your board served on that group, and that kind of stemmed from a lot of high volume of variance requests, specifically in core neighborhoods where a lot of the properties were legally non-conforming due to our 1998 Land Development Code. A lot of those variances were being approved and seemed reasonable, but didn't meet the letter of the law. And so, as a result of that task force, there was a number of recommendations that were put forward, some short, medium, and long-term recommendations. I think one of the long-term recommendations was actually to kind of take a closer look at the Land Development Code for more of a comprehensive review of that. So that task force, coupled with just kind of ongoing conversations, specifically at the Planning Commission, kind of led us to where we are today. And we have an RFP out right now. It's set to close June 3rd. That's when proposals are due, to take a look at the current land development code and just provide us with an assessment of how that, on a number of different kind of review criteria that I'll talk about in a minute here. And so some of the outcomes that we're hoping to get out of this project is just basically an understanding of the strengths and weaknesses of the current land development code as it relates to the purposes and needs outlined within. There should have been a couple of items in your packet there. This project summary is kind of what this PowerPoint is referring to, and it's a little bit outdated now that we have an RFP out, but anyhow. Clear rationale supporting a preferred alternative action, and then buy-in support and general consensus from stakeholders on needed actions. And so really what we're looking for is a document at the end of this, just communicating the strengths and weaknesses of the code, and then providing us with a clear sense of how to, if there are issues or deficiencies that are identified, a clear path forward for addressing those. So the general scope of work that you'll find in the RFP, one is just general project management. We're really looking for the consultant to kind of lead this project with input from staff and the city of Fargo in general. There's going to be a public and stakeholder participation element to this. Residents as well as the development community, I'm sure have some strong opinions on the current set of development codes. And then number 3 there is kind of the meat of the study. It's just the development code analysis. And so some of the criteria that we're looking to review the LDC on are things like alignment with existing plans and policies. Our current Go 2030 comprehensive plan was adopted in 2012, and our current land development code was adopted in 1998. And so there might need to be some updating based on some of those updated goals and policies of the city. Legal compliance, there are some federal requirements and state statutes that we want to make sure that we're in alignment with. For example, there's been some Supreme Court action on signage as it relates to the First Amendment that we might need to take a look at. D, just taking a look at our general development review process. How does that, how does our kind of day-to-day processes for our different applications and things stack up in general. User friendliness of the code. You want to make sure that it's usable for everyone, not just professionals. And then kind of lastly, city financial impacts as well as economic considerations. Understanding that, trying to get a better sense of how our development patterns impact city finances, and then additionally the economic considerations for private property owners and developers and the like. And so from there, we're looking for development of maybe some different alternatives to kind of review and consider, and then ultimately coming up with a recommended or a preferred alternative. And then the consultant would kind of wrap up the project with some presentations and communications of those deliverables. So the schedule that's outlined in the project summary is outdated, and so I have an updated one on the screen here in front of you. Like I said, we do have the RFP out currently. Proposals are due next week, June 3rd. We're hoping to have interviews and have a consultant selected sometime in June, with a contract going to City Commission sometime in August. Then hopefully kicking off that project shortly thereafter. We're kind of estimating maybe a 6-month timeline for this project, or we'd like to kind of, that's kind of our goal, I guess, for this project. So I think, yeah, that's all I have for this one. Be happy to answer any questions you have or anything before I move on.
Any questions for Aaron? Aaron, I know, Deb and I were on the Land Development Code Task Force, and there was a lot of discussion about maybe looking at going to a form-based code or something. Is that kind of what will be part of this, is to kind of evaluate whether that makes sense or not?
Yeah, it is. Really, I think we're looking at this like everything's on the table. All options are out there right now, and, there's, certain elements or different things from elsewhere in the country that we'll want to look at, some best practices, what's working for other cities. And so certainly I think something like that will definitely be discussed as part of this.
Okay. Thank you.
So if there's nothing else there, I'll move on then to our second project I wanted to talk to you about today, which is our core neighborhoods plan. So just, you'll probably recognize this map as well. The general study area that we're talking about when we talk about the core neighborhoods plan is kind of the first and second, neighborhoods out from the downtown core. I think we use a similar, I think it's the same kind of general study area for that land development code residential task force. And so with this study, we're looking at it as kind of a next phase after the adoption of the downtown in focus plan. We just took a close look at the downtown core, and now we're going kind of outward from there to take a look at the residential neighborhoods that ring the downtown area. So this is just a general study area. It's not set in stone or anything, but when we look at some of the the issues that we want the study to take a look at and dive into, kind of these core neighborhoods seem to make the most sense. So some of the issues that have been discussed over the years, I think you probably maybe have seen a couple articles in the Forum newspaper here recently as well. Things that relate to property maintenance and neighborhood character, code enforcement and blight, infill and redevelopment pressures, especially around the NDSU campus, for example, as well as around the downtown area. Population growth and just how to accommodate some of that growth, as well as some of that infill that comes along with that. Affordable housing is kind of a nationwide topic of conversation in general. Lack of diverse housing options, school enrollment, aging infrastructure, competing goals. This is one that we oftentimes have to kind of grapple with at Planning Commission and even here, where we have a couple different goals that are kind of working at cross purposes, it seems, when we have specific applications come up. We want to preserve some of our historic character, but we also want infill, and so when we get some of these redevelopment projects, how do we kind of sort through some of those discussions? And then other kind of livability issues, not that these are necessarily issues, but some of the things that this study might touch on, such as healthy food, mobility, recreational amenities and trails, trees, vegetation, public social spaces, employment, crime, safety, art, aesthetics, events, and kind of anything else that relates to that general topic. So as far as the project outcomes from this that we'd like to see, first, a collective and broadly supported future vision and plan for the core neighborhoods, a clear understanding of the various issues affecting core neighborhoods, improved trust and understanding between and among stakeholders, primarily citizens, city staff, and the development community, a framework for which future planning efforts can build upon. So as a result of this study, it's likely that there's going to be future topics that come up, or maybe we want to dive in deeper to individual neighborhoods. The hope is that this study could kind of provide that broad or general base to start those future efforts. Clearly defined implementation actions and recommendations, and then stakeholders and city decision makers having relevant data, information, and policy guidance to inform future decision making. So this is what we're hoping to get out of this effort. The scope of work elements for this project, again, the consultant will be kind of leading their team and the general project with general oversight from the City of Fargo. Public and stakeholder participation is going to be kind of one of the main focal points of this study. There's a lot of interest in general in this study, whether it's neighborhood residents, neighborhood groups, developers, what have you. So that's really going to be a point of emphasis. 3, existing conditions and data analysis, just getting a broad and understanding of the core neighborhoods before kind of diving in, helping to kind of validate maybe things that are heard during the public and stakeholder participation. 4, having some vision and goal setting. The Go 2030 comprehensive plan kind of outlays the broad vision of the City of Fargo, but how does that look at when implemented at the neighborhood level is kind of what this is meant to look into. 5, identification of focus areas. I think staff and depending upon who you talk to might have some topics that we want to make sure that this study focuses on, but I think there's going to be a need to kind of focus in on some specific areas at the outset, just to make sure that it's not overly broad where we don't really get any good information or good recommendations out of it, but we don't want it to be too specific either where we're leaving out kind of important topics. And so finding that sweet spot. 6, policy development and analysis, really just coming up with some solutions to issues identified. Plan development, just putting together that document with an implementation strategy is going to be another point of emphasis. Hopefully finding some way to maybe start that implementation when the consultant's still on board, rather than just kind of leaving us with a document with questions as far as what the next steps are. And then lastly, just some presentation and communications to our various boards and commissions as part of the scope of work. So this schedule, we're just kind of following the Land Development Code diagnostic. We're hoping to have an RFP put together and out the door here in June, with proposals due in August, interviewing in September, with a contract to City Commission, hopefully in late October, so that they can get started here in November. And then we're estimating about a year time frame for this study. There's just going to be a lot to it. So that's all I have for you on that one, and be happy to answer any questions you might have for me.
Will this be in addition to and working with the Fargo 2030 re-envisioning?
Sorry, what was that last part?
Will this be in conjuncture with the 2030 plan as it goes along?
Yeah. So the idea would be that the Go 2030 comprehensive plan is kind of the guiding framework for this effort, and so there's probably going to need to be some further refining of some of those elements within that document, as far as, again, how do these kind of broad goals, how do they look, at the neighborhood level when they're actually being implemented? So things like, walkability and infill, historic preservation, those are all elements within the plan, but when the rubber hits the road, I guess, what does that actually look like is kind of what we're hoping to get out of this. Hopefully that made sense.
So are you anticipating then that the Land Development Code might need further revision after the core neighborhood plan results?
Yeah. So that's something we talked about as well. These projects will overlap a bit, and so with the RFP that's out for the Land Development Code diagnostic, we did mention in there that we are working on a core neighborhoods plan as well, and there might need to be some communication between those two consultants, because as you pointed out, there may be some things in here that inform the LDC diagnostic and vice versa. So that's our hope, is there can be some communication between the two studies.
Although the completion of the Land Development Code and evaluation direction is, 3/4 ahead of the core neighborhood study.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, any further questions for Aaron? All right, thank you, Aaron. We have no other business on the agenda, so is there a motion to adjourn?
So move.
Or second?
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, we're adjourned.